When I was a kid, my dream was to be an archaeologist. Finding dig sites, unearthing history, the whole rigmarole. I wanted to make history by finding it. I never ended up going down that path, but the things I learned about and grew a passion for have stuck with me ever since. I may not talk about it much on the channel, but I adore history. Seeing all these little set pieces in the tale of humanity fall into place is really satisfying to me. My interest in archaeology was because I wanted to fill more chapters in that ever-growing book. But the thing is, I never wanted to be out in the sun digging all day. Like, at all. The reason I was into the field was because I just wanted more chapters in this story I liked. That's all it ever was to me, a fascination with stories and analyzing the different parts to see why they worked. In a way, my dream just grew along with me. I moved on to different stories, and the tales I love now are totally different than the ones back then. Still, it's the same. I've changed a lot, but I can still turn my old feigned loved words into true. Dreams are not some set-in-stone thing. They can change. It all just depends on how the person changes with them. But regardless of the form they take, they are undoubtedly cheap. Like a flyer for a 25-cent carnival, there's something that promises all these bombastic and fantastical things. But in reality, it's usually just a musty tent. That's not a bad thing, though. Dreams, for as cheap and flimsy as they are, inspire us. That carnival lit up even any aspect of your imagination and made you gawk in awe, and it was a quarter well spent. Takashima Zakuro, a girl Yuki meets on July 12th at the top of an apartment complex, says regarding dreams that it's better off that they're cheap. After all, if even one of them can come true, it doesn't take away from how beautiful that is. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm sure you get it by this point. A world filled to the brim with dreams is far more captivating than a sky filled with anxious words. A Friday sky never knows best in a frilly dress. What more does a girl need? I am 100% serious when I say that this is the best opening any visual novel has ever had. In all honesty, I think that if this scene, these lines even, don't hook you, Subahibi Hibi probably won't be something you like. This VN, though it does have a more focused quote-unquote plot later on, mostly takes place inside the heads of its characters. I'd wager that like 70% of the story is made up of internal monologue. What and how they think is the story. And I know this is weird to say about a VN, like of course it spends a lot of time in the characters' heads, but no. Subahibi really takes that idea to the next level. Hence why I say if this scene doesn't hook the reader, well, they should probably go read something else. Yuki's monologue here goes from thinking about the sky changing every day of the week, to anime, to getting interrupted by takuji. That last one, by most writing standards, should make Yuki shift gears to give more insight into the disappearing lad. As it's something most readers would naturally be curious about. But she doesn't give it a second thought and goes back to reflecting on the sky. Yuki is her own character, and she cares about what she cares about, not the reader. Subahibi isn't written from the typical half-ass self-insert protagonist mindset that most VNs call their nature. These characters are their own, and what you garner about the larger plot through seeing their antics is entirely on you. Subahibi is perhaps one of the most character-driven works of all time. Sometimes that means exploring the psyche of someone who births a fanatical cult, and other times that means reading pulse-pounding scenes of a girl coming to terms with her feelings about other girls. To link it back to what I was saying though, from a purely plot perspective, the cult scenario is far more titillating than the other, but when it comes to brass tacks, I find them both equally valuable. As they're presented in the visual novel, both of these tales want you to engage with them and think about the characters and plot elements therein. Due to that, they can both offer up extremely compelling writing. It's all just a matter of how you read the visual novel, and I know that sounds heady and haughty, but hear me out. On a microcosmic scale, there's no better example of what I'm talking about than the spirit house Yuki and Sakura wander into. A lot of strange things happen there, both in and outside the actual plot. The background switch to photos ran through 20 filters like it's 2001 and the most popular visual novel is still Tsukihime. The gondola, as noted by Yuki to look and sound decrepit and worn down, is spry as can be. And lastly, the date July 20th, 1999 keeps popping up. A date that avid Ska-ji fans will know is relevant to Sui no Sora, his earlier work that Subahibi is a soul sister to. That's many red flags that something's queer here. Combine that with the locations. First a convenience store, then a living room, a classroom, a hospital bed, and finally, it ends with them under the sky. All these places are usually filled with people, and are all things one would go to in life. In that sense, Yuki's takeaway from the ride that it makes you a spirit disconnected from the lives of the living seems to have some merit. Honestly though, there's all sorts of things you could read into this little section. For example, one really interesting theory is that it's Otonashi Ayana recalling her last day outside, in line with the theory that she's schizophrenic and hospitalized after the events of Sui no Sora. Though I don't know how English speakers came to that conclusion, the only thing we have translated of Sui is the fucking OVA. Others think the scene a commentary on life itself, how these little moments like being in school or going to a gas station seem to be stopped in time. We're not really thinking in those places. It could be 1999 or it could be 2012 and there'd be no difference because those places and the mindsets fostered therein are frozen in place. Seriously, look at how the classroom en masse has changed in the past 30 years. Other than the outfits, it really hasn't. I think any reading of the scene, except that one, you know which one, is valid, but personally, my own is a more metatextual interpretation. What's important about this section is less what's happening and more what's being said. I just gave you a few interpretations, but as the ride is going along, Yuki and Sakura also give their commentary. Yuki sees things in a more direct way, thinking things like the convenience store and living room are a commentary on modern consumerist culture. Meanwhile, Sakura takes a more personable stance, thinking things like the living room represent something like a father's fear that the family unit will fall apart. They both give unique answers to what is essentially a Rorschach of a ride, and upon hearing their takes, you might agree, or, as many readers have done, myself included, you might feel inclined to come to your own conclusion. I don't think the Spirit House has a direct meaning in the text. It's nonsensical and ultimately purely up to speculation both in the minds of the characters and everyone who reads Suba. It's due to that I think the real purpose of this little scene is to directly involve the audience in the conversation. Furthermore, in doing so, it's pleading with them to interpret the work going forward in a similar manner. There's gonna be scenes where characters don't give commentary, but you can. This is the only scene where characters are put into the same situation as you, the reader, but you are the ghost, so to speak, throughout the entire story. You have the power to interpret what you see and apply it to the rest of the text. Now, to clarify, I see Suba not as something clearly defined, but fluid in its ideology and interpretation. It really is kinda like a dream. There's unifying themes that most people will see and identify with, but when focusing on the finer details, everyone's going to think something different. Which is perfectly fine. I think it's wonderful, honestly. Taking that fluid framework and actually engaging with the text, I'd argue, makes the VN far more enjoyable than it otherwise would be. That is the key to understanding Subahibi. If you just read this and go through the motions, things like the Yuri in this chapter won't keep your interest beyond a surface level. Like, at all. And hell, maybe it still won't for some people.
That it does have some homosexual content in it.
But personally, I find that it's very enchanting in its own way. Reason A is that it's fucking adorable. Reason B, though, lies in interpretation, what you or I personally take away from the work. See, I put myself in Yuki's shoes while reading and imagine what it'd be like to feel the things she does. You don't have to be gay, a tranoid, or a gay tranoid, God forbid, to relate and empathize with her arc here. I mean, really think about her predicament. To be socialized into one way of thinking your entire life, then to realize that what you really want more than anything in this world is antithetical to that. To know that if you choose this path, it'll make you happier but ostracized from society and maybe even loved ones. On a macro scale, everyone's had something like that, something they were afraid to admit to others out of fear of rejection. I really like Yuki's innate response to this too. She tries to deny herself over and over again, but ultimately can't keep up the facade. It's a cute arc. Your empathy stocks would have to be rock bottom to not get it. This idea of being afraid to confront yourself is, of course, something deeply interwoven into the other two characters who get romantically involved with Yuki. They have it a bit different though, and they each provide more ways of reacting to their environment. Kagami and Tsukasa already know they're gay. They're just so tense about being upfront about their feelings because it's wrong to have them. If Yuki doesn't feel the same way, it could get weird and totally ruin their friendship, so they're distant in funny ways. That's their motivation and impetus for most of what they do, and if this were a lesser VN, that one-note character trait would be all you get out of them. However, the simplicity this chapter opens with can be quite deceiving. The way it unfolds, it's like the VN slowly setting down its hand of cards, revealing more and more depth. Kagami is of course more tsundere in her nature, but she's not falling into stereotypes. There's motivation for what she does and how she acts. After one sits down and gets to know her through reading, she opens up and you realize she's someone who's legitimately afraid of how intense her feelings are. As for why she acts out towards Yuki, well, Kagami used to think she was a boy, so she's always been more rough with her. That's why she runs off and bops her on the head when things don't go exactly as planned, literally just hitting the abort switch and getting out of there. It's cute. Looking at Tsukasa, she takes the path of suppressing her emotions. She outright states what she wants, but doesn't act on it because her sister also loves Yuki. She's the younger one, but she's always looking out for the older one. I'm sure this has absolutely no parallels to anything later in the story. Once Yuki gives literally any leeway though, Tsukasa acts on instinct and absolutely goes for it. Like I said, funny reactions. I think the Yuri isn't just some detour or distraction from the real plot. It's part and parcel of Subahibi. The way I laid it out, their motivations sound simple, and they are, but the way they're explored is what matters. With the Wakatsuki sisters in particular, not only is there a lot of information regarding their past with Yuki that you can dig into, i.e. Tsukasa chasing after Kagami feeling nostalgic to Yuki, but even with their Yuri-centric feelings, there's still loads of stuff to unpack. While it might be clear how they feel from the start, the VN clearly wants you to put the pieces together yourself because Yuki is as aloof as can be regarding romance. It's something she understands subconsciously, and you can feel that in her actions and words, but she never has those thoughts in her internal monologue until directly confronted with them. The pieces to say,
"So gay! Hello, you faggot!"
are given to you from essentially go. It's up to you to use them, and then it's all about seeing how their motivations take them from place to place on horny, wacky Yuri hijinks. Which, all that is actually important for later on, because doing that basic puzzle solving will help you get a leg up on the characters both yet to be introduced and the roles given to the current cast later. This is especially true of Zakuro, but I'll get to her in a bit. Right now, I want to talk about cute Yuri romance and why it's great. Upon picking Kagami in the route split, she's unsure at first if she can kiss Yuki. It's adorable how flighty she is with her feelings. Kagami, despite her Soon nature, is really timid, much like Yuki is. Their little dynamic is Yuki awkwardly taking the lead, unsure what to do, and Kagami excitedly following along by jumping 10 steps ahead. Essentially, Kagami wants to be led to make sure it's okay. Hey, real quick, there's your little lesson on consent. You don't have to say, "Can we have sex?" though that is valid. Just expect to be able to cut the air with a knife after. Basically, you just have to make sure both parties are comfortable. Do that. It's that easy. Don't be like Nishimura, But anyways, once Kagami gets the go-ahead to kiss Yuki, she doesn't just leave it at a peck on the cheek. She takes her idealized future and intertwines it with Yuki's. Replace idealized future with tongue, and you'll see what I was really talking about there. Kagami is a very abrasive and precocious girl. Some say she needs correction, but really all she needs is direction, specifically from herself. The entire route up to the kiss has essentially been her gaining the courage to do it. First with making Yuki a lunch, then with focusing most of their conversations on, "God, boys suck, don't they, queen?" Then the last phase in Kagami's non-existent plan comes with the King's Game. Something that's just for fun and outside the bounds of normality. It's like when you play Spin the Bottle, that thing people definitely did en masse and totally wasn't just a cliche overused in shitty mid-2000s rom-coms. Just because you kiss someone in the game doesn't mean you kiss them in real life, but in some cases, you do want to be in a relationship with that person to kiss them IRL, or maybe your feelings are just so visceral that you need to, in some small way, live the fantasy to quell the fantasy. It's just harmless fun between girls, but to Kagami, it's a brief second to be her ideal self. Once she gets that kissy-kissy though, she can't go back to normalcy. That kiss didn't douse the flames, it only multiplied them. It's not like Yuki can do anything either when she sees Kagami. She's in the exact same boat. Eventually, with them both bottling their emotions up and acting like it never happened, things explode. Which happens literally the first time they're alone together and confronted with those feelings. God, I love Yuri. They both come to the understanding that their feelings are valid, that it's okay to be gay. It's so wholesome. When you feel like that, no amount of socialization can stop you from being yourself. There's no part about their relationship that isn't beautiful. It's just heartwarming. And the crazy thing is, I think Tsukasa's little route is even more so. See, Tsukasa not only designates herself as an emoto, but she also has unrequited love. Two of my personal favorite tropes of all time. And best of all, that love is eventually requited. You wouldn't believe how satisfying that is to see as someone who's seen this trope never go anywhere time and time again. All Tsukasa wants to do is love Yuki. She admits that outright many times, but she never acts on it. Again, her sister loves Yuki too, and Tsukasa is also unsure if Yuki will even reciprocate her lesbian advances. Same setup with the King's Game as before, and Tsukasa gets chosen. All of a sudden, she gets to stop holding herself back. Tsukasa isn't just kissing Yuki, she's literally dripping on her because that's what she's always wanted to do. Tsukasa knows what she wants. There's no awkward, "what do we do?" Tsukasa wants Yuki. Tsukasa fucks. I love her and getting to see her be happy. She's the real underdog in this story. However, there's not a lot to say about Tsukasa beyond what I've dabbled in here without talking about Haseki. We'll talk about Haseki a lot. You know how I am with characters I feel are underappreciated. But that's later, and this is now. Now is the time for a little philosophical tangent I want to talk to you all about. No, I'm not talking about the Tractatus yet. I'm talking about eroge. Not enough people fucking understand it. I'm talking about both fans and creators too, by the way. Believe it or not, those Steam pages filled to the brim with smut aren't making a strong case for H scenes. The sad truth is that a lot of people are under the consensus that eroge immediately equals bad. Coincidentally, most people's intro to visual novels was either Muv-Luv, God I'm sorry for you, or Fate Stay Night. Or Doki Doki, but the odds of you getting here from that are pretty low. Now, I personally can't get past the lacrosse arc in Muv-Luv Extra without literally having panic attacks from how shit it is, but with regards to Fate, that game doesn't exactly set a glowing example with its eroge. Putting aside that Mirror Moon hated H scenes with a passion, so translation of those scenes is tentative, as they are read by most English speakers in 2 of the 3 routes in Fate, the stuff feels insanely forced. But most importantly, isn't even hot. I'm talking down to the CGs too. Takeuchi was clearly passionate about this one Ren and Saber CG, but nothing else. Lest this video dive into another long Fate tangent, however, let's get back to the point. As a result of this being a lot of people's introduction, you'll start to see a trend within the VN community. I hate that word. There's a huge stigma around any form of eroge that isn't outright built from the ground up to be horny-brained. Specifically vanilla, male-female only, horny-brained.
Homosexual content.
Anything that explores sex in an interesting way or in ways people would normally balk at are relegated to clickbait YouTube videos, usually titled something like, "The most disgusting thing I've ever read," or "The most heinous visual novel ever." People never actually play them or give them a chance because they were told that it's weird eroge stuff only for degenerates. Which is a shame. It's a shame. My crackpot theory is that most Western visual novels are shit because they either live off the cliche god-awful eroge tropes, or totally course-correct and run in this opposite Puritan correction where they view themselves as higher than Takuji. Which, can you blame them? The consensus on a large scale is, just control through the scene, you don't have to read that garbage, lol. People will hear that and follow that advice for every visual novel they read, not giving any H scene a chance because it's cringe or fetish bait not required for the story. The thing is, if you do that in Subahibi, you'll be left wondering why you just skipped half the fucking story. Subahibi uses sex as a tool for storytelling. It uses it really well, too. See, the stigma associated with VNs is all down to everyone getting one bad taste. Not even everyone, it's just infected the culture and people get skippy based on hearsay. FSN is a good work, but it's poisoned the collective unconscious in this regard. Seriously, yes, some VNs use eroge in the stereotypical way, but a lot of them use it as a legit plot point to forward the story. In Subahibi's case, it uses it in vastly different ways across its multiple chapters, and without the eroge, it'd be legitimately worse, by a considerable margin. For an example of that, we'd need do nothing but loop back to how this tangent started. The Wakatsuki sisters. They both have their own little slice of eroge right at the tail end of their respective routes. And they're both really beautiful scenes. I mean that. Think about this whole Yuri tangent I've spent the last however many minutes talking about. Kagami and Tsukasa's emotions towards Yuki are positively brimming, and Yuki's are similarly starting to boil over. She's realized that it's okay to be gay, or that she just doesn't care, and she, like the other two, decides to not hold anything back. To give in to these visceral feelings conjured up within her heart and meld into the one she loves. That can't be conveyed by a simple kiss. It's not as easy or wholesome as a little will they won't they crush the anime has spent building up to for 24 episodes. What's depicted here is real love. While in a relationship, not everyone, sure, but most people have sex. I know, that's insane. To pretend that this overly Puritan reality exists wherein people only do it in the right place or at the right time is complete nonsense. That's a fantasy to trump all fantasies. Sex is not something that should be shunned. People do it, like, why lie about that? It's not some great evil. It can take on many, many forms. Which, some good, some bad, all of which, though, Subahibi will convey. But for right now, what's shown in these H scenes is the ultimate expression of love. They're really good scenes that pay off what the sisters feel for Yuki and what she herself feels towards them. It wasn't just a one-off kiss during a drunken game night. It wasn't just Kagami making lunch for her platonic friend. It wasn't just a haphazardly moaned confession on the couch. It was all real, and these scenes all built up to and were capitalized on perfectly within the eroge. I love pointing to these two in particular because they're quite literally the most vanilla encounters in the game, and yet people will still get bitchy about them.
Homosexual content?
It's like a little litmus test for homophobia, like, just say you're bigoted and move on. Subahibi is full of weird and disturbing stuff. If this is what sets you off, you're built wrong. I'm sorry. Well, I'm not like actually sorry, like get some help. The Kagami and Tsukasa scenes are the first in a long line of eroge, but all of the eroge in Suba follows a similar format in being conducive to the story being told. These ones just happen to be cute. Subahibi shows the power of eroge when used properly. It isn't even the best example of this kind of thing. There are tons of visual novels that go above and beyond in comparison. Suba literally just does it well. It is the standard. I don't know if all that was a hot take or not, but here's one tangentially related to this whole subject that definitely is. I think these scenes and dynamics, the whole love thing, only work as well as they do because Yuki is a girl. No, I'm not joking. Yes, this is a double standard, and yes, it's bullshit. But to act like it doesn't exist is to deny the truth. Why I say that is, well, look at something like Fate's Stay Night. I know, it's my go-to example, but it really just is a catch-all for visual novels, so forgive me. That VN's H scenes can feel creepy and slapshot in writing at times because there's a clear power dynamic at play. It's the fantasy of the normally haughty girl turning submissive just for you, man. Which is fine in a vacuum if your story is a power fantasy where that's the focus, but doesn't work if your characters are meant to be on an equal playing field. This is ultimately a small thing, yes, but I think the reason a lot of people laugh or are put off by the eroge and something like Fate's Stay Night is because we're supposed to legitimately believe that micro-penis extraordinaire Emiya Shiro is the one guy who can get these girls to submit to him. Which, after saying it out loud, just sounds kinda gross. Look, I love Shiro, he's my boy, but these H scenes set a horrible precedent by playing into stereotypes that are both tired and just kinda cringy. Let's compare that to Suba. When Kagami and Tsukasa come onto Yuki, the story doesn't make it a power dynamic thing. It's these two characters showing genuine love, but they're both confused in how they feel for the moment. They're navigating things as they go along, and most importantly, they're on an equal playing field. That in particular can especially be seen during something like the King's Game scene. Seriously, swap out Yuki for a guy and tell me that 3 girls getting naked in front of him and pining for a kiss wouldn't immediately change the dynamic. If Yuki was a guy, there would also be no navigating around, but can I allow myself to love her? The guy would just admit his feelings from the get-go, or, the classic VN thing would happen where the guy pussyfoots around the issue until it's convenient to the plot. Which feels forced every time it happens. This story, focusing on a Yuri romance, ensures that those feelings of conflict that drive the plot are real. They make a hell of a compelling narrative, too. I love cute girls doing cute things, and this VN satiates my inner desire to see them have a romance too. That's better than anything K-On! Or Lucky Star ever did. Lastly, these homosexual scenes, God, I fucking love that clip, tend to filter out anyone who is looking for that power trip self-insert fantasy. I've said it before, but Subahibi literally gatekeeps itself. And until recently, with the rise of people who hate something but continue to read it anyways, that served to make the community a very tight-knit spot. Suba is one of those things you either click with or will despise, which, to be fair, is also how the community is, for better and for worse, but that's kind of unrelated. What is related is our good friend Wittgenstein. He wrote the Tractatus. I mentioned it in passing earlier, but now is the time to dip some toes into that ocean. It helps them rationalize the world and find beauty in its seemingly meaningless boundary. Others write off philosophy as totally unneeded. Why would you wonder about the world? We're all here. We exist. That's what matters. Truthfully, I think both those takes have merit, but personally, I love the stuff. Now, full disclosure, I have no education in the field. All I have is a fascination in being somewhat well-read because it pops up in anime and VN shit way more than you'd think. Like a really odd amount. Subahibi in particular really favors one work above all others, however, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. This is a difficult book. Like, really difficult. There's a wonderful video that helps explain things by Jadevine, link below, but Wittgenstein has this writing style that can be extremely frustrating. The man was clearly a genius in his own right, but he gives very little in the way of examples. He cross-references contemporary works that will not make sense to you if you haven't already read said work. And lastly, though the math does make sense, a good knowledge on algebra is required to parse any of what he says during those sections. Algebra is not my strong suit, so that took some trial. Now, my purpose here isn't to dissect the Tractatus. That is a task for philosophy majors, and my interpretation would likely sound like nothing but a schizoid rambling. You see, the Tractatus is hard to actually codify into words, which is fitting given Wittgenstein's own conclusions within the work, but that's besides the point. My purpose in reading the Tractatus and presenting bits and pieces of it to you now is simply to show how we can gain a better understanding of Subahibi from it, which is also extremely fitting because though the Tractatus is difficult if you're just going into it dry, I find that Subahibi actually helps on understanding the thing. And vice versa. They're very, very complementary to one another. An understanding of one tends to directly feed into the other until you get them both. To illustrate my point, let's take 3 quotes from the Tractatus and directly connect them to the Zakuro end of this chapter. The first 2 quotes read, 1.1, the world is the totality of facts, not of things. 5.62, in fact, what solipsism means is quite correct, only it cannot be said, but it shows itself. Now, taken on their own, these quotes can be challenging. Again, Wittgenstein rarely gave examples in his work, but using these 2 quotes, we can garner some basic meaning. Wittgenstein makes the case that solipsism, or the belief that only the self is real, is quite right to an extent. There are obviously things outside of the self, but that you can only see, feel, and interact with what you contextualize as your own environment does mean that your world and mine could be entirely different. There's a quote later on where he says the world of the happy is quite different than that of the unhappy, and that's just the difference between people. I think there's something interesting there. There are similarities, but the way I see and interpret things is going to be different than you. Essentially, think my green is not the same as your green. Wittgenstein goes on to say, 5.632, the subject does not belong to the world, but is a limit of it. This, as some of you may know, is the quote that opens up It's My Own Invention. But even here and down the rabbit hole 1, it has some meaning. arguably more. This is where we finally tie things back around into Suba. During the Zakuro end, Yuki wakes up in a world totally devoid of people, which is made all the more eerie by the fact that nothing is actually stopped. Lights are on and trains are still running. The world is simply vacant. Let's look at that quote again. 5.632. The subject does not belong to the world, but is a limit of it. Yuki here is indeed in the world, but it's hard to say she belongs to it in her current detached state. She's in her own little space, isolated from everyone else. To equate it with something tangible, it's like she's trapped in a dream. Equating it to that becomes particularly relevant when stuff starts happening on the rooftop, but one step at a time. We base our dreams on reality. What we see and interact with, even in a fantastical sense, has some basis in logic. So even taking the theory that this chapter is just a dream, there's still some logic within everything that's happening. Put another way, there is a reason for everything. For example, when Zakuro does stuff like dropping the doll off the roof on July 16th, 5:58 p.m., it has a definite impact somewhere else. Her actions of dropping the doll are something that appear to be illogical at first, but it does have tangible effects that we'll see later on. That's the kind of world Yuki's in. Yuki is still a limit of the world, or in the terminology of Zakuro, the world girl. Doubling back to the first quote about the world being the totality of facts, everything we see here, the buildings, the square, the rooftop, are all atomic facts. I know that sounds weird, but I'm just using Wittgenstein's vocabulary. Essentially, they all exist in what make up one would consider the world. They exude all the possibilities that could ever be. There is no what-ifs in their logic, because if there were, they simply wouldn't be here. Why Wittgenstein says solipsism has some merit is that we cannot say for certain that other people exist in our reality. By which I mean our reality as we perceive it. What does exist is you and your own world that you interact with. The implications of this are touched on a bit by Yuki and Zakuro in their conversation on the rooftop, but think of our existence as an MMORPG that different people can connect to. You can't see other people's builds or what graphical modifications they have on their game. Hell, they might be playing what looks like an entirely different thing than you. But you can still, on some level, interact with that player because you both share this connected world. Some Subahibi fans have taken to calling these two the inner and outer world, which is a helpful way of thinking about it to some extent, but I feel like that language is a little faulty. I'd refer to them more as translucent layers. To throw back to the gamers, however, there are two layers to both the world and an MMO. The one without the internet connection and the one that allows us to see and interact with others. Now, imagine you're walking around, no internet connection, but you still see another player. What that would usually be called in any game is a ghost, or in Zakuro's terms, the girl of the sky. Someone who is an anomaly that can only be here for a short time, which is what she is in Yuki's world after falling into her. Literally, she fell into Yuki's own personal world. She hacked in via LAN connection and can still interact with her even after everything that wasn't an atomic fact was pruned away. Though, she does eventually want to get out and get a move on with her own life after living in this blissful dream. She knows she can't stay here forever, that things are ephemeral. However, this is still Subahibi confirming what Wittgenstein said. Other people certainly do exist. That's a fact. But how we interact with them can vary. The things that happen in this world might seem irrational, but there is actually a unifying logic to it all. This is Yuki's personal world, taken to its illogical extreme. What do we know about Yuki? She knows some outdated anime, she loves to read, she smokes, and is all around into odd things. All of that is a factor here. Literally, the entire Milky Way Railroad segment is one huge homage to the Galactic Railroad, this old OVA from the 80s. which coincidentally is the same time period Yuki references anime from as she's walking to get smooshed by Zakuro. Next, a book she used to own and read through all the time starts talking to her. The book says to her, "Every mark indicates a part of me that my owner was proud of." That is literally him saying that Yuki highlighted passages from the book that she liked. No one else would have that memory. Ergo, this is her own world. There's tons of stuff like that, like the stuffed animal appreciating her choice of cigarettes, which, as a side note, I love that that's an epic Fully Cooley reference. Ska-di, you're so smart. But suffice to say, this is Yuki's own world disconnected from everything. She can go anywhere and do anything she can imagine. Though it is noted that she's limited to logic. We cannot speak of an illogical world how it would be. Basically, she's just limited to her own worldview. I'm not going to get all Wittgenstein on you again. I could go on and on making references to the Tractatus, and I will do so in future parts, but do you see what I mean about Subahibi and the Tractatus complementing each other? These two works can absolutely stand alone, but it's enriching to view one through the lens of the other. With the Tractatus being as difficult as it is, I think Subahibi actually serves as a good reading guide of sorts. I was reading both concurrently for this series, and you would not believe how often my mind bridged one to the other. Where Wittgenstein refused to give examples, Ska-di provided them in subtext throughout his own work. It really is quite the dynamic. If you're even a little interested, the Tractatus is available for free online. Additionally, if you're finding it too heady, there is, again, a wonderful video by Jade Vine that helps clarify things. It certainly aided me tons in my own reading. Link below. However, Ska-di, being the immaculate writer he is, doesn't limit these connections to just one work. For instance, what opens up this very chapter isn't a quote from the Tractatus, but from the play by Edmond Rostand, Cyrano de Bergerac. Now, Cyrano was something I also read for this little series, and as a quick aside, oh my god, go read it. It's a short read, and it's positively wonderful. I totally get why Zakuro loved it so much. It fits her so well. Conversely, the 1950 adaptation is on YouTube for free and is an amazing adaptation of the novel. But in terms of Subahibi, the quote that opens up this chapter fittingly fits the story very well, especially on a reread. Yes, I will be reading this in full because it's just that cool. The quote reads, "Oh, we have our pockets full, phantasms of our brains. Dream fancies blown into soap bubbles. Come, take it, and change feigned loved words into true. I breathe my sighs and moans haphazard-wise. Call these wandering lovebirds home to nest. Come, take it. You'll see that I was in these lettered lines, eloquent all the more, the less sincere. Take it, and make an end." I love this quote. It sounds really cool and exudes the poetry that Cyrano practically breathed. But I do have a few qualms, such as it not making any fucking sense. See, Subahibi uses a rather old translation of Cyrano for this quote. As a result, it sounds fancy, but kinda says nothing. Having actually read the play in a more up-to-date translation, I can appreciate the flowery language now, but I really couldn't until then. To hopefully enlighten you, the lines, as they appear in the context of the play, convey a simple message. Cyrano, an ugly but intelligent poet, is giving his wit to Christian, a handsome but dull man, in order to win the heart of Roxanne, the girl they're both madly in love with. In combining wit with beauty, they form the ultimate man, capable of doing what one alone could not. Cyrano says that they were meaningless love letters, ergo the line, "take it and change feigned loved words into true," but his words were only ever meant for Roxanne. He was the one inside the lettered line sending his love, though Roxanne will never know that because she only sees Christian as embodying those words. Now, if you're smart, you can already see how this ties into Down the Rabbit Hole 1, and we are going to have to dip our toes into the later chapters, specifically Looking Glass Insects for this. Sakura, in her chapter, can only see Takuji when she talks to Yuki. She sees his handsome face but is literally incapable of seeing the girl Yuki underneath because her worldview just doesn't allow her. Even though Yuki is the one she fell in love with, she doesn't know that. Until this chapter, where she, by virtue of falling into her world, can see Yuki for the beautiful girl she is. Wonder what that's an allegory for. It doesn't matter that everything about the person she once loved has changed. She still loves them. It's a really beautiful sentiment and adds a whole new level of tear-inducing when you realize that the reason for Sakura crying when Yuki plays the Dreaming Fish song is because that's the same song she played on their first date. The song that reminded Yuki of Sakura, and the exact one that Yuki just said was her favorite. It's really, really cute. I like their relationship a lot in this chapter. It's legitimately one of the best things about this VN on a reread. There is so much precedent for every cryptic thing Sakura says and does. I really like comparing the two dates and seeing how much Sakura enjoys their second outing. She's a lot calmer, but happier. The Takuji she knew was a poet, a swordsman, and maybe even a pioneer of aerodynamics. But Yuki is real. She is what's underneath that veneer, and for getting to experience that, Sakura's happy. She's not as jittery or overcome, but she's calmly content in getting to see her beloved as she truly is. Even if this world is nothing but a cheap dream to both Yuki and maybe even the reader, it still had value to Sakura because every day was wonderful. This ending really is a beautiful send-off for everyone involved, and I totally get why some people would think this chapter better as a post-Looking Glass Insects epilogue of sorts. But I think it's best here at the beginning. It can be really cryptic at first, but the mystery adds to it. This chapter has so many nods to later endeavors. Hasaki shows up for a brief second, which as an aside, it is incredible how often she pops up on a reread. Ayana makes her first appearance, and in addition to talking about events happening later in the VN, shows that she's not this Dempa mystery girl later chapters would have you believe. She is full of spunk and readily jokes around with Yuki. She's really just a fun character who likes to f with people. I'm getting off track, but I've already talked about Sakura herself too. If you're paying attention, this chapter plants so many seeds in your mind for what's to come. It really is like a premonition you have in a dream that has a set limit in Yuki. Everything, and I do mean everything, is limited to things she would see and do. The OST itself doesn't branch out to anything outside of like 7-ish tracks, the backgrounds hardly ever change, and the only time CGs appear are when the empty vessel of this dream world has been filled with feelings of love. The vessel, that being Yuki, is empty at the start, and was never meant to be filled. Again, diving into later chapters, she's a headmate of Takuji, created to take over. Created really recently, too. She is meant to be this ideal caricature of everything good, of everything Takuji sees as ideal. But as we see in every ending, she is a vessel that can be filled with so much happiness and come into her own. As her conversation with Takuji implies near the start, it doesn't matter how long she's been here. She is here. She is her own person, regardless of the circumstances that birthed her. And she's done being a ghost. I like that line a lot. It has so many readings and is just one of those things that's inherently raw. My own reading of it a first time through was that she was done living in her own world disconnected from others, that she was going to take her little MMO and give it an internet connection, so to speak. Which leads beautifully, I think, into down the rabbit hole too, where she gets to take an active role in the plot and be in that world that's interconnected to everything. But another reading could be that she's going to confront the very nature of her existence. This CG does pair awfully nicely with one of Tomosane later on. It's like they're literally facing each other. So maybe she's coming to terms with it finally. Maybe that was her revelation. Another reading could simply be that she's going to get off the railroad and go back to her life, and live happily. Hell, if you want to make a real stretch, you can connect this to the Hill of Flowers ending and say that this is Yuki coming back to life after getting her memories back. After all, she does seem to have some kind of understanding during the railroad segment that's never made perfectly clear. So who's to say she's not literally becoming alive again? The Galactic Railroad can take her anywhere after all. Of course, that one's kind of a stretch, but I think it's pretty interesting of an interpretation. There's so many things you can garner from that one line, and that's why I love Suba. The whole VN is built like this. Honestly, please, I implore you to leave your ideas in the comments of each and every one of these parts. Suba is extremely interpretive, and that's one of its strongest points. My take is not some be-all end-all. Like Wittgenstein's philosophy, Subahibi isn't something that can ever be set in stone. It's fluid. It can take many different shapes depending on the reader and even chapters. In this one, that shape happens to be adorable Yuri with the side of Dempa. But even on that level, how you see the formation of that Yuri is going to be different from me. Does that make sense? Well, it will in due time, I hope. This video has been reflective of the content presented to me. Yuki Minakami is a goddess, and I desperately want to be her in every sense of the word. Join me soon where we will truly be going down the rabbit hole. Anyways, that does it for this first little part. Again, this project has taken the entirety of July to prepare, and more parts are coming very soon. This will undoubtedly be the longest and hopefully best thing I've ever made, so please do give some feedback in the comments on the like bar and subscribe with the bell to see them right when they drop. Also, it'd be super special awesome if you supported this content on my Patreon. I'm just a simple video maker trying to make a living, so please do support me if you have the means. Anyways, Sleepy-chan is off to finish up part 2. Make sure to brush your teeth and get to bed at a reasonable hour. Good night, everyone. Also, I love lesbian anime girls.